A 1-0 Bruins team, and here he is, Judd Sirott in studio. Judd, thank you for coming in. That's awesome to have you here.
Well, Ninkovich said that traffic was bad yesterday, so I wanted to make sure that I left a little bit early. Ninkovich, not far from where I grew up. He was southwest side at a great city, Chicago. So he went to Lincoln Way. But when I hear him talk about traffic, that's a guy who worked up to Stevenson for years. Time to get in a little early.
All right, so you come from Walpole too, because he's coming from way down there. So you want to definitely leave early. So
Judd Sirott will be with us every week on the Greg Hill Show. Greg Hill not in today, by the way. I'm Ken Laird. Greg is off for the first Judd appearance, unfortunately. But you guys connected last week, which is good.
Actually, coming in, I was really hoping that Sheriff Judd would do this segment. I actually think it would be so much better than this.
No. You guys are equals, but it's got to be something with the name.
Judd is brought to you by Sports Etc., Boston's best hockey shop, powered by Bauer, with the best selection of Bauer skates, sticks, and goalie equipment at 1303 Mass Ave in Arlington or online at sportsetc.net. So, Judd, I know you didn't get to call the game, which is never fun because, we want to hear the local call.
Would love to do every single game.
But I was impressed just going in, didn't know much about this team, a lot of new faces, and I came away thinking, boy, exceeded my expectations. What did you make of their debut?
I think impressed is a great word that you and I had talked about just before we came in and we had started this segment. I think one of the things to think about with this Bruins team is how quickly can they recapture the identity that they want to play with. So what you saw last night is pretty much it. Goaltending, defense, special teams. Yeah, you got to mix in your top guys. Pasternak had a terrific night, as did Elias Lindholm. The power play goal, the way he played on that top unit was terrific. So that's a great sign for the Bruins. But the other thing is, now you got 81 more. Okay, you got to do it again tonight here against the Blackhawks. And then you've got to continue to do it throughout the season. But that was a really good way to start.
Judd, we always know the importance of Swayman, but I think the question that I have is people talk about Pasta, and we know what he is, but they bring up Morgan Geekie, right? He had 30-plus goals last year. Is this something he can consistently do again this year? Because you're going to need another guy to give you that 30-plus goal season. Could he do that again?
I think it's certainly possible. I think in the conversations that we've had with the general manager, Don Sweeney, I don't know if he expects necessarily that he'll hit that number, but can you hit high 20s? Can you approach 30? I think that's definitely doable, especially playing with that group. And having a conversation with Geekie before the start of the season, it's so different. Remember, this guy was a healthy scratch last year at the beginning of the season and didn't really turn it on until January. Now it's completely different, and it's not just for him, but it's for the entire team. From the moment that he stepped foot in camp, he played and practiced with Pasternak and Lindholm. So I think in many ways he has such a bigger head start than he had last season. Now you've got to be able to deliver. It's not just the contract, but the fact that you scored 33 last year, now the expectations rise.
When you look at Swayman in particular, though, and you see how great he was last night, obviously he didn't start the season opener last year. There was a lot going into Swayman going into the season. Are you seeing from being around the team a different guy, a different energy? Was that all just because the holdout going into the season last year, or is it just him building upon himself?
I think there's a lot of different things at play there. When I had a conversation with him just before the team had left for Washington, and basically the question to him was, how different is your headspace now than where it was a year ago? He said a year ago at this time, and remember, he didn't sign and jump on the plane until the Bruins boarded to go to Florida. He said, I was in the mountains of New Hampshire at this point. Now he's had an entire training camp to go through to get up to game speed. But I think the most important thing for him, Courtney, to your question, was to be around the guys, to build that camaraderie. We're talking about identity. We're also talking about leadership. That's sort of the overarching thing. So how does this function? Again, I don't think it's uncommon throughout the National Hockey League for teams not to have a captain. But how does this leadership group function with Pasternak, McAvoy, Lindholm is wearing an A, Jeremy Swayman is signed long-term, and some of the other guys who are long-term? How does this function? That's a great start for him. The way he played in net, technically, it was quiet. It was simple. And the guys in front, if you remember, watching the game last night, it was one and done. There weren't a whole lot of chances. And 5-on-5, fairly even.
Was Hampus, Pasta, and McAvoy your guess as captains going into this?
I don't know if I necessarily had a guess. I know we joke with Razor all the time that goalies can't wear a C. Ask him a story. When he was with Vancouver, Roberto Luongo was the captain, and I think it was kind of a gong show. But he's probably, I would think that makes sense for a guy like Lindholm. I think there's a couple of guys that you probably could have thought about giving it to. Older guy, veteran guy, leader, a guy that you're going to rely on.
One of the things you talk about, Judd, is you talk about the special teams. And last year, the Bruins were, when it comes to penalties, they were one of the most penalized teams in the NHL. Last night, Washington has 5 power play opportunities. How can you keep putting that much pressure, and how do they clean that up? Because if not, you're putting all this pressure on Swayman to make sure he makes stops against the opponent's power play. How do they clean that up?
You got to check with your feet, especially early in the season. I didn't love all the calls that came against him, and that goes actually, for some of the calls. I actually think the refs got the call right on John Carlson giving the Bruins that power play, which eventually triggered the game winner last night. But you have to be able to check with your feet, because anytime that referees see you're reaching to check or you use an open hand to grab a guy, that's usually an automatic. But for the Bruins, Wiggy, it's a great point. They were in the box way too much as a team last year. They were among the league leaders in minor penalties. You had the league's penalty minute leader in Nikita Zadorov, who, by the way, played a terrific game last night. If you look, just as a quick sidebar, Zadorov was second to Charlie McAvoy in ice time on the Bruins last night, and that's how valuable he was, especially to your penalty killing unit. They have to be able to curtail that. They have to be able to check with their feet, because it's going to be hard for the Bruins to outscore their problems the way that they're built.
Judd, so Greg Wyshynski compared David Pastrnak to Ilya Kovalchuk on the Thrashers.
No.
Do you think that's a fair comparison? Or do you think that this is the Cam Neely tough defensive strategy is far more sustainable over an 82-game season?
With all due respect to the old puck daddy, and I had a chance to see Ilya Kovalchuk for years when I was in the minors and we were affiliated with the Atlanta Thrashers. He was a goal scorer. I can see some of those similarities. He was not the playmaker that Pastrnak is. Last year, David Pastrnak tied his career high. I think he had 63 helpers, which was among the league leaders. That was never really a number that Covey put up.
NESN's play-by-play voice Judd Sirott joining us in studio here on the Greg Hill Show, and he'll be with us every Thursday at 8:20 on our Bruins Thursday. All the goals last night came from the top-line guys, even though one of them was a great power play goal. Where does the secondary scoring come from? That's still the worry, right?
I think they're going to have to be able to do it by committee. Just to kind of go back to the last preseason game, and obviously preseason doesn't count, but the way that they scored in that game, whether it was defense, your middle six being able to chip in, that's what they're going to have to be able to do. Those top guys, as you talked about with Geekie, Pastrnak, and Lindholm, they're going to be expected and they're going to be leaned on to be consistent scorers all season long. But what can you get beyond that? I think the Bruins as a team, I think that there's a lot more offense that they can tease out of the blue line, especially from guys like McAvoy, Lindholm, Zadorov. He had a 14-goal season a couple of years ago. I don't think anybody expects that he's going to get double digits.
Yeah.
But he's a guy who can handle the puck, and he has some skill offensively. I think you can tease more goals out of that. But what can you kind of get out of the middle six to bolster your offense?
Like Arvidsson had some chances last night, just didn't finish.
He did, which is encouraging. Pavel Zacha made that. This was obviously on the power play, the indirect off the wall. Just as you execute it, you see the addition of Steve Spott, who's on the coaching staff for a couple reasons, primarily because he can run the power play. He's done it for years in the National Hockey League, and he's a veteran assistant coach who's been around some really good coaches during his coaching tenure. So a guy like Marco Sturm can lean on a guy like that. What can you get out of Pastrnak? What can you get out of that second line? You saw him in fits and starts there last night.
Yeah.
But if they're able to kick in a little production, that really bodes well for the team.
If they want to perform above the expectations that we kind of set for them, is Swayman going to have to play at a Vezina type level where he's one of those guys that you could be looking at as somebody who could potentially win that, because you talk about their inability to score goals other really than Pasternak?
He's going to have to be really good, and I think tonight, by the way, we're going to see Jonas Korpisalo. I think that's the other thing. It's not just that Swayman has to be really good. Korpisalo has to be really good. You're going to see him a lot more often. The schedule's a little bit more compressed this year because it's an Olympic year. You're going to see a lot of back-to-backs, 3 and 4s, 4 and 6s. So that means that your tandem is going to have to produce. But I think for a guy like Jeremy Swayman, when it comes to numbers, Wiggy, a lot of people obviously want to focus on save percentage or high danger saves or goals against average. The most important stat for any goaltender is wins. Does he give you an opportunity to win every single night? And if you think about last night, it wasn't just that he was making great saves, but he was making key saves at key times that preserved that victory.
Can I ask a non-Bruins question for
Bring
you?
it on.
Because last time that you and Billy were here, Wiggy was talking a lot about McDavid.
Yeah.
And so now you look at that 2-year extension. We were surprised by the number, and I brought up the fact that maybe it was so team-friendly because they could trade him.
I hope. I wish. I don't think it's going to happen. I'm not surprised because we had talked about it that Connor McDavid signed a short-term deal. I think what a lot of people were shocked at, in fact, even Elliot Friedman over at Sportsnet said, I actually had to dig in and make sure that the number was right as far as the salary, because he's making 12 and a half.
I thought it was a misprint.
I
thought it was 2 years at $25 million per year. I thought it was 2 years and $50 million.
I could not believe it. So, there's been a lot of reaction around the National Hockey League. I think one of them is respect that he's dug his feet in and he said, I want to bring a championship to Edmonton, but I think he understands that even though the salary cap is going up, he needs to be surrounded by better players. One of them is going to have to be in goal. It's on the Edmonton Oilers, Jeff Jackson and Stan Bowman and those guys to be able to fill in. But where I thought you were going with that one is, so I think the last time we were in here and we had talked about this big free agent class potentially coming out.
Yeah.
Right. All right. So McDavid, check off the board. Kaprizov, off the board. Eichel, check off the board. He signed Kyle Connor. Check off the board. He signed an 8-year deal to stay in Winnipeg. So those are some big names in free agency that I think a lot of teams, not just the Bruins, were salivating about, depending on how it would go at the tail end of this season, that maybe those were guys you could acquire. There's still some really good players out there, but those are some big names off the list.
If Jeremy Swayman is playing at a Vezina level and this team is overachieving compared to where we had them kind of before the season, do they, A, have the assets to even help add to this team come trade deadline time, and B, are they even willing to, just knowing that it felt like this year was kind of going to be a reset year heading into that big free agent class?
Yes, absolutely. You heard Cam Neely and Don Sweeney mention it at the press conference just before we started the season, that the Bruins really tried. They made a run at some of the offensive players that were available in free agency during the summer, whether that's guys like Brock Besser or Nick Ehlers. I'm not really sure on that one. And as far as the assets, so the Bruins have 2 first-round picks coming up in this upcoming draft, 2 first-round picks in the next draft. I have a hard time believing that the Bruins are going to pick 4 times in the first round and use all those picks. Those are assets that they can parlay into something else.
Looking forward to the call tonight, Judd. You and Brick, 7 o'clock on NESN. What time does the
our pregame show?
Pregame?
So you can kick in with Billy,
right.
Sophia, Barry, Razor, and the boys starting at 6 o'clock, and then we'll get it going at 7. Bruins and Blackhawks tonight.